In the previous tutorial, we set up our inventory container so that it corresponds with Bob's actual inventory. So right now Bob owns a health potion in slot 1 and that's it. We also made it so that when we hit the D key, we could show a little picture that corresponds along with the slot. But we sort of faked it actually, right? So Bob doesn't actually own a sword, right? That's an empty slot. Really what we did was we hard-coded this just to sort of see if we could create the objects and where they, what they looked like when they were there. So the next two tutorials are going to deal with sort of connecting our object pictures with Bob's inventory. And I'm going to break this up into two because the second part of the tutorial can get a little bit long-winded and dicey. So let's just do two things today, okay, for this tutorial. First thing we're going to do is actually we're going to create a group, I should say, of like objects. And here's how we're going to do that. Let's click on this button up here that looks like a Q*bert level. If you're old enough to know what Q*bert is, or maybe you just like the game, you'll know what I mean. Let's right click and rename this group. Whoops, sorry about that. Rename. We're going to call this items and hit enter. And now if we double click on items, we can add objects to it. And we're going to add our sword and we're going to add our potion. And we're going to hit apply. So now these items are together in a group and we can actually code, we can use one line of code to actually speak to all the items in a group. We're going to add one more item to this as well. So let's click plus sign, let's add a sprite. And we're going to call this item empty. And in Paint 3D I made a 64 by 64 transparent sprite. So you see it's essentially empty. I made that because we're going to use that as a placeholder. So let's set this up as a global object and let's add it to our items grouping. So it's part of this group now. We'll hit apply. And now that we've grouped our items so far, and we can add more later on of course, we need to go to our global variables. I'm sure you love hearing that now. Game settings, global variables. And we need to go to our items database. And we need to add one more child variable for each one. This is another reason why in the beginning stages of a game you want to keep things very short so you can add and grow as you move along. Let's go to this first item database here, item 0, and let's click the child variable. And we're going to call this one pick. And this pick child variable is going to give us the reference word that we need for the corresponding picture we're going to use. So since item 0 is an empty slot, we're going to use the empty picture. Item 1, let's add a child variable here. Let's call it pick. Item 1 is your basic sword, which means it's going to use our sword picture. And again, notice how this word corresponds with this picture. That's very important. Item 2, let's add our child variable. And again, it's also a sword. Item 3, let's add our child variable. We'll call it pick. And I have not made a little map pick yet, but we will eventually, I will eventually, and we'll call it map. Item 4, let's add our child variable. We'll call it pick, and this is a potion, right? Notice again, it corresponds potion to potion. Okay, so we now have a way in the items database to reference what picture to use for each item.